In an isolated rural region, a poor and lonely farmer makes the most painful decision of his life, selling his purebred horse, the only valuable asset he owns, to a millionaire magnate who controls the entire region. With a broken heart, he hands over his faithful companion and walks away, not knowing he has just initiated a shocking discovery. During the first days at the new property, the horse shows constant restlessness, exploring the most remote corners of the farm until discovering an abandoned stable that emanates a strange odor. When it manages to enter the dark place, the animal makes a discovery that leaves it in pure shock. An entire family of 6 people, a young mother, a baby, and 4 children, tied up and kept in deplorable conditions. What the animal does next defies everything you believe to be possible. Before we begin, if you love animals as much as we do, subscribe now so you don't miss any more moving stories. Thank you. Now, back to our story. The sun rose slowly over the parched fields of Hope's End, streaking the sky with a mournful orange that seemed to mirror Jedediah Stone's broken heart. His trembling hands stroked the silky mane of Storm, the majestic white stallion that had been his only companion for the last 8 years. One last time. The animal's intelligent eyes seemed to understand that something final was about to happen. Jed's homestead was small, surrounded by arid lands that stretched as far as the eye could see. Here, in this forgotten corner of the heartland, the smell of dry earth eternally mingled with the sweet aroma of hay stored in the barn. It was a familiar scent that had always brought peace to his simple heart, but today it only intensified the anguish consuming him. Storm neighed softly, as if trying to console his owner. The horse, with his cotton-white coat and eyes that shone with an almost human wisdom, had come into Jed's life as an abandoned foal. The farmer had found him injured during a thunderstorm, tended to his wounds with the patience of one who knows the value of life, and they had been inseparable ever since. For all these years, Storm had been more than a work animal. He was a confidant on lonely nights, a companion on difficult mornings, a source of strength in moments of despair. When Jed talked to him about the farm's problems, about the drought that killed the crops or the loneliness that weighed on his chest, the horse would listen with an attention few humans ever showed. But now, the debts had piled up like impassable mountains. The bank was threatening to foreclose. Creditors were knocking on his door every week, and Jed had nowhere left to run. Storm was his only valuable possession. A purebred horse worth more than the entire farm. The decision to sell him was the most painful of his life, but there was no other choice. The roar of a powerful engine broke the morning silence. A gleaming black truck approached on the dusty road, kicking up a cloud of dirt that spread through the air like a dark omen. At the wheel was Richard Thorne, the richest and most feared man in the entire region, owner of thousands of acres and the controller of the local economy. Richard stepped out of the vehicle with the arrogance of a man who has always had everything. He wore expensive clothes that clashed with the simplicity of the place, and his cold eyes scanned Storm as if the animal were merely merchandise. There was no human warmth in his gaze, only the cold calculation of a man who saw numbers where others saw life. "So this is the famous horse," Richard said, his voice dripping with superiority. "A fine specimen indeed. He'll look perfect in my collection." Jed swallowed hard. The word collection felt like a knife in his chest. To him, Storm had never been an object to be displayed, but a true friend. But he had no choice. The money Richard offered was enough to pay off all his debts, with a little left over to start again. "He's gentle and smart," Jed murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "He likes apples and always sleeps on the right side of the stall. He's afraid of thunder. But if you stay close to him, he calms down." Richard wasn't even listening. He had already pulled a wad of cash from his pocket and held it out to Jed with a dismissive gesture. Here's what we agreed on. My men will come to get the animal tomorrow morning." The tears Jed had tried to hold back finally escaped. Storm, sensing his owner's sorrow, moved closer and gently rested his head on the man's shoulder. It was as if he was saying goodbye, as if he knew this moment would change everything forever. With a shattered heart, Jed handed the reins to Richard, took the payment, and watched helplessly as his greatest treasure was led away. He didn't know that he had just planted the seed of a discovery that would transform not only his life, but the entire community. Richard Thorne's estate stretched like a private kingdom through the region's valleys. Imposing wrought iron gates guarded the entrance to the ranch, which looked more like a modern fortress surrounded by miles of electric fences. Here, power was manifested in every detail, from the luxurious stables to the mansion that rose in the center of the property like a monument to wealth. Storm was led to a stable that was larger than Jed's entire house. The place was immaculate, with marble floors, silver feed troughs, and a ventilation system that kept the temperature always perfect. Any other animal would have been ecstatic with such luxury, but Storm's heart remained empty. His intelligent eyes scanned every corner, searching for something familiar he would never find. Samuel "Sam" Carter, Richard's head wrangler, was a man of 60, with hands calloused by honest work. Unlike his boss, Sam possessed a natural kindness that was reflected in the caring way he treated every animal under his charge. When he saw Storm being brought into the stable, he immediately noticed there was something special about this horse. "Welcome to your new home, boy," Sam murmured, holding out his hand so Storm could sniff it and get used to his scent. "I know you must be missing your old owner. I would be too." But Storm showed no interest in the exquisite food offered to him. The imported oats, crisp apples, and even the brown sugar cubes remained untouched. The horse paced restlessly in the stall, neighing softly as if calling for someone who wasn't there. Sam watched with concern. In his 40 years of caring for animals, he had never seen such peculiar behavior. Storm didn't seem physically ill, but there was something in his eyes that indicated a deep agitation, as if the animal knew something the humans around him did not. During the first night, Storm barely slept. He stood for most of the time, his ears always alert, as if listening to sounds no one else could hear. His hooves tapped nervously on the marble floor, creating a restless rhythm that echoed through the silent stable. Richard appeared the next morning to admire his new acquisition. Dressed in expensive riding gear, he hoped to impress visitors coming to see his private collection. But when he tried to approach Storm, the horse recoiled, showing an instinctive aversion that surprised everyone. "This animal needs to be properly broken," Richard said with irritation, his voice filled with authority. "I will not tolerate disobedience on my property. Sam, see to it that he behaves as he should." Sam nodded respectfully, but inside he felt a pang of sadness. He had known Richard long enough to know the man saw animals only as status symbols, not as beings with feelings and needs. To Richard, Storm was just another trophy to display, to demonstrate his power and wealth. In the following days, Sam tried everything to calm Storm. He took him for walks through the property's green fields, offered different types of food, and even brought other horses for company, but nothing worked. The animal remained restless, always looking towards the property's boundaries, as if searching for a way out. During one of these walks, Storm began to exhibit even stranger behavior. He pulled Sam towards the back of the property, to an area that was rarely visited. It was as if something in that direction was calling to him with an irresistible force. Sam resisted, trying to guide the horse back to the main areas of the ranch. But Storm insisted, his muscles tense and his breath quickening, indicating an urgency the wrangler couldn't understand. There was something in those distant fields that awakened all the animal's instincts. Storm's third morning on Richard's property brought with it even greater agitation. The horse had spent the entire night on his feet, his nostrils flared, catching scents that seemed to come from far away. Sam arrived at the stable before dawn and found the animal sweating, his muscles taut as if ready to run or fight. "What's going on with you, boy?" Sam whispered, approaching slowly. "It's like you know something we don't." Storm turned his head towards the wrangler, and for a moment their eyes met. Sam felt a chill run down his spine. There was an almost human intelligence in that gaze, a desperate urgency that made the man's heart race. It was as if the animal was trying to communicate something of extreme importance. During breakfast at the mansion, Richard was hosting two businessmen from Chicago, interested in doing business in the region. They admired the luxurious property while discussing million-dollar contracts, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding in the stables. For Richard, it was just another normal morning of demonstrating power and wealth. But at the back of the property, far from the visitors' eyes, Storm had discovered something that no human had yet noticed. During one of his desperate attempts to drag Sam to the distant fields, the horse managed to break free from the lead rope and ran freely towards an area covered by old trees. There, hidden among the thick vegetation, was an abandoned barn that looked like it hadn't been used in months. The wooden structure was deteriorating, with loose boards and a roof that let the rain in. The place exuded a strange and disturbing odor, a mixture of fear, despair, and something Storm's keen instinct recognized as human suffering. The horse approached the ajar door of the abandoned barn slowly. His hooves made soft noises on the damp earth, and his breath created small clouds of vapor in the morning air. There was something inside, something that put all his senses on high alert. It wasn't just the smell that bothered him, but also almost imperceptible sounds, muffled breaths, and cautious movements. Sam, worried about Storm's disappearance, had gone in search of him. He followed the animal's tracks through the fields until he reached the abandoned barn. When he saw Storm standing in front of the structure, ears erect and his entire body on high alert, he knew he had found the source of the horse's restlessness. "Storm, what are you doing here?" Sam called out, approaching cautiously. "This place has been abandoned for a long time. There's nothing here that should interest you." But the horse didn't move. He remained motionless as a statue, all his senses focused on the dark interior of the barn. Suddenly, an almost inaudible noise came from inside the structure, as if something or someone had moved quickly to hide better in the shadows. A knot formed in Sam's stomach. There was something wrong with this place, something his gut told him to avoid. But Storm showed no fear, only a steely determination that kept him rooted there, like a silent guardian protecting a terrible secret. The wrangler firmly grasped the horse's lead and tried to pull him away from the sight. "Let's get out of here, Storm. This is no place for us." But for the first time since arriving on the property, Storm actively resisted Sam's commands. The animal planted his hooves on the ground and refused to move, neighing softly as if trying to warn the wrangler about something urgent and dangerous hiding in the shadows of that abandoned barn. Sam's curiosity finally overcame his caution. After observing Storm's stubborn behavior for several minutes, the wrangler decided to investigate what was really inside the abandoned barn. With hesitant steps, he approached the ajar door, feeling his heart beat faster and faster in his chest. Storm accompanied him, positioning himself beside Sam as if to protect him from some imminent danger. The horse kept his head high and ears alert, but there was something different in his posture now. It was no longer just restlessness, but a protective determination that impressed the wrangler. "Is anyone there?" Sam called out softly, lightly pushing the wooden door, which creaked on its rusty hinges. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was soon broken by a sound that made Sam's blood run cold. It was a muffled cry, followed by desperate whispers coming from the dark depths of the barn. It wasn't the sound of injured animals, but something much more disturbing. They were human voices trying to hide. With trembling hands, Sam pushed the door wide open, letting the sunlight flood the damp, foul-smelling interior. What he saw next would scar his soul forever. Huddled in a dark corner of the barn, an entire family was chained in deplorable conditions. A young mother, who couldn't have been more than 25, held a malnourished baby to her chest. Her eyes were red from crying, and her torn clothes barely covered her thin body. Around her, 4 children of different ages clung to each other, their dirty faces marked by terror and hunger. "Please," the mother whispered in a hoarse voice, "don't hurt us. We haven't done anything wrong." Sam stood paralyzed for a few seconds, unable to process the enormity of what he was seeing. Storm, by his side, neighed gently, as if trying to reassure the imprisoned people. The horse had found exactly what his instincts told him he was looking for. "My God," Sam murmured, his voice barely audible. "What are you doing here? Who did this to you?" The woman looked at him with a mixture of hope and suspicion. She had seen only cruel faces for so long that she was afraid to trust any show of kindness. "Mr. Thorne," she whispered, as if speaking the name would invoke a curse. "He brought us here months ago. Said we had to work to pay off a debt my husband owed him." Tears streamed down Sam's face as he observed the horrific conditions in which this family lived. There were only a few buckets of dirty water, remnants of moldy food scattered on the dirt floor, and thick chains that limited their movements. The nauseating smell came from the total lack of hygiene and basic care. One of the children, a boy of perhaps 8, stretched out a thin hand toward Storm. The horse approached gently and let the boy touch his velvety muzzle. For a moment, a faint smile appeared on the child's face, the first display of joy that Place had witnessed in a long time. "Where is your husband?" Sam asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the panic he felt inside. "He died trying to protect us," the woman replied, her voice breaking. "Mr. Thorne said that now we have to pay his debt by working until we die. Our children too. He said if we try to escape, he'll do the same to other families in the area." A wave of nausea washed over Sam. He had worked for Richard for years, but never imagined his boss was capable of such cruelty. The discovery turned everything he thought he knew about the most powerful man in the region into a terrible and hauntingly real lie. Sam remained silent for long minutes, observing the broken family before him. His hands trembled as he tried to process the magnitude of the horror he had just discovered. Storm remained by his side, as if he understood that his mission was just beginning. The horse had been the instrument to expose this terrible truth. "How long have you been here?" Sam asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Since last winter," the mother replied, adjusting the baby in her arms. "My name is Maria, and these are my children. Little Carlos here is very sick. He needs medicine, but..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The silent tears running down her face said it all. Sam looked at the baby and saw that the child was too pale, breathing with difficulty. He wasn't a doctor, but his years of caring for animals had taught him to recognize when a living being was fighting to survive. "Listen," Sam said, looking around to make sure they were alone. "I have to leave now, but I will be back. I'll bring real food and clean water. And I will find a way to help you." The hope that shone in Maria's eyes was painful to see. "Are you really going to help us? Please, don't give us false hope. We've suffered too much already." Sam nodded firmly. "You have my word. But you must stay quiet. If Richard finds out I know about you." He didn't complete the sentence, but everyone understood the implied threat. On the way back to the main stables, Sam's mind was racing. How had Richard managed to keep this family imprisoned for so long without anyone knowing? How many employees were involved in this horror? And more importantly, how could a simple man like him confront the most powerful man in the region? Storm walked beside him with determined steps, as if he knew they had started a dangerous but necessary mission. The horse seemed to have found a purpose in his new life, not as a trophy for an arrogant rich man, but as a guardian of the innocent who needed protection. Back at the main stable, Sam tried to act normally, but his mind was in turmoil. Every time he saw Richard, he felt a mixture of disgust and fear that was hard to hide. How had he worked for this monster for so long without realizing his true nature? In the afternoon, Richard appeared to check on his horses, as he did daily. He observed Storm with satisfaction, noticing that the animal seemed calmer. "I see you've finally managed to tame the animal," Richard said with a cold smile. "I hope he's ready to receive visitors tomorrow. I have important investors coming to see my collection." Sam nodded, but inside he wanted to scream. How could this man talk about his collection of animals while keeping a human family in captivity? The hypocrisy was nauseating. "Mr. Thorne," Sam dared to ask, trying to keep his voice neutral, "and that abandoned barn at the back of the property, wouldn't it be better to demolish it? It's in terrible condition and might spook the horses." Richard's eyes narrowed for a moment, a dangerous expression crossing his face. "That barn stays exactly where it is, and I suggest you avoid that area. There are hazardous materials stored there." The threat in Richard's voice was clear. Sam swallowed hard and nodded, pretending to accept the explanation. But now he was absolutely sure. His boss knew exactly what was happening in that barn, and there were likely other dark secrets hidden on the property. That night, while Storm finally managed to rest after fulfilling his mission of discovery, Sam lay awake, planning. He needed to find a way to help Maria and her children, but he knew that one false move could put all their lives in even greater danger. The following days were the hardest of Sam's life. During the day, he carried out his duties normally, caring for the horses and attending to Richard's demands. But his nights were consumed by nightmares, where he saw the pale face of baby Carlos and heard Maria's desperate whispers for help. Storm, as if sensing his new caretaker's anguish, became more cooperative and attentive. The horse seemed to understand that they now shared a terrible secret and a responsibility that went beyond their normal lives. His intelligent eyes followed Sam constantly, as if ready for any action that might be necessary. On the third night after the discovery, Sam finally made a decision. He waited until he was sure Richard was in the mansion, entertained with his business, and then quietly made his way to the abandoned barn. He carried a bag with food he had saved from his own meals and a bottle of clean water. Maria was awake when he arrived, rocking the baby who was crying softly. The other children were asleep, huddled in the corner, trying to stay warm in the cold night. When she saw Sam, Maria's eyes filled with tears of relief. "I knew you would come back," she whispered. "Carlos is getting worse. I don't know how much longer he can hold on without medical care." Sam knelt beside Maria and examined the baby carefully. The child was too hot, his breathing was irregular, and there was a sickly pallor on his small face that deeply alarmed him. Even without medical knowledge, he knew that this baby was gravely ill. "Maria," he said softly, "I have to tell you the truth. I'm just a horse wrangler. I don't have the power or influence to face Richard Thorne directly. But I can't keep pretending I don't know what's happening here." Maria's shoulders shook, but she didn't let herself be completely defeated. "I understand. Just the fact that you came back means more than you can imagine. It's been so long since anyone treated us like human beings. Sam distributed the food among the children, who woke up at his arrival. He watched as they devoured every crumb with a desperate hunger that broke his heart. The oldest child, a girl of perhaps 12, looked at him with a suspicion that revealed deep trauma. "Is there anyone out there who could help you?" Sam asked. "Relatives, friends, someone who might be looking for you?" Maria shook her head sadly. "And we're from another state. We came here because my husband had gotten a job on Mr. Thorne's ranch. But when we arrived, we found out it was a trap. Now we have nowhere to go. And he made it clear that if we try to escape, other families will suffer the same fate." Richard's psychological manipulation was as cruel as the physical chains. He not only imprisoned his victims' bodies, but also their hopes and their will to fight. Sam felt a rage grow in his chest, a rage he had never experienced in his entire peaceful life. "What about the other ranch hands?" he insisted. "Does anyone else know about you?" "Some men come here sometimes," Maria replied, lowering her voice even more. "They force us to work on the property at night, when there are no visitors, but they're all afraid of Mr. Thorne. He pays well for obedience and punishes disobedience severely." Sam then understood the extent of Richard's operation. It wasn't just an isolated case of cruelty, but an organized system of exploitation that depended on silence and fear to function. The revelation made him feel even smaller in the face of the enormous problem he was facing. The next morning brought a surprise that would change the course of the entire story. Sam arrived at the main stable to find Storm restless again, but this time there was something different in his behavior. The horse wasn't looking in the direction of the abandoned barn, but towards the road leading off the property. Suddenly, a familiar sound echoed through the morning air. It was the noise of an old pickup truck coming up the dusty road. Sam immediately recognized the vehicle. It belonged to Jedediah Stone, Storm's former owner. But what was the farmer doing here? Jed got out of the truck with hesitant movements, clearly uncomfortable being on Richard's property. His simple clothes contrasted even more with the surrounding luxury, and his eyes searched anxiously for Storm. When he spotted his old companion, his face lit up with a mixture of joy and concern. "Storm!" Jed called softly, and the horse immediately ran towards him, neighing with a happiness he hadn't shown in days. Sam watched the reunion with emotion. The connection between man and animal was palpable, as if they were two souls finally completing each other again. Storm rubbed his muzzle on Jed's shoulder, and the farmer stroked his mane with tears in his eyes. "Sorry to bother you," Jed said to Sam, "but I was so worried. Last night, Storm showed up at my house. He jumped all the fences and walked for miles to find me. I was afraid Mr. Thorne would think I'd stolen the horse back." Sam was shocked. Storm had escaped during the night and traveled all that distance to find his old owner. How was that possible? The fences were high, and the main gate was locked. "How did he get out of here?" Sam asked, genuinely intrigued. Jed shook his head. "I don't know. When I woke up this morning, he was at my door, just like old times. But there was something different about him. He was agitated, trying to pull me somewhere. It was like he wanted to show me something urgent." At that moment, as if he had overheard the conversation, Storm began to pull Jed towards the back of the property. The horse used a strength the farmer had never felt before, as if his life depended on getting Jed to a specific location. "What's wrong with him?" Jed asked, trying to resist the animal's force. "I've never seen Storm behave like this." Sam's heart began to race. Storm was trying to lead Jed to the abandoned barn. The horse had understood, with his extraordinary intelligence, that he needed help to save the imprisoned family. And who better to help than his dearest friend? "Jed," Sam said, his voice filled with urgency, "I think Storm wants to show us something very important, something that could change everything." The farmer looked at Sam in confusion, but the determination in Storm was impossible to ignore. The horse was clearly desperate to lead them somewhere, and his agitation only increased with every second they stood still. "All right, Storm," Jed said finally, ceasing his resistance. "Show us what's so important." As the trio headed towards the back of the property, Sam felt a mixture of hope and terror. He was about to reveal Richard's terrible secret to a man who, despite his kindness, had no more resources or power than he did. But maybe, together, they could find a solution. Storm led them with steely determination across the fields, his hooves striking the ground in an urgent rhythm that echoed like a war drum. The fate of an innocent family now depended on the courage of two simple men and the intelligence of an extraordinary horse who refused to accept injustice. When they reached the abandoned barn, Jed immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. The smell emanating from the place was nauseating, and Storm displayed an agitation that bordered on desperation. The horse kept looking at the ajar door, neighing softly as if calling to someone. "Sam, what is this place?" Jed asked, a sense of unease growing in his stomach. Sam took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back. "Jed, what you're about to see in there will change your life forever. I need you to prepare for something that will shock you to your core." With trembling hands, Sam pushed open the barn door. The sunlight revealed the terrible scene he already knew, but for Jed, it was a devastating blow. The farmer stood paralyzed for several seconds, unable to process what his eyes were seeing. Maria was awake, rocking Carlos, who was crying weakly. When she saw the two men at the entrance, she instinctively flinched, shielding the baby against her chest. The other children woke up at the noise and clung to each other, their eyes reflecting the terror of those who had learned to fear any human presence. "My God," Jed whispered, his voice breaking. "What? Who did this to you?" Tears began to stream down the farmer's face as he observed the deplorable conditions in which the family lived. His legs trembled, and he had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. In all his simple life in the country, he had never imagined that such cruelty could exist. Storm gently approached Maria. As he had before, the horse seemed to understand that his mission was working. He had managed to bring help to these desperate people. His intelligent eyes alternated between Jed and the imprisoned family, as if to say, "Now you understand why I brought you here. This is Maria," Sam said softly, "and these are her children. They've been trapped here for months. Richard Thorne is keeping them as slaves, forcing them to work to pay off a fabricated debt." Jed approached slowly, his hands outstretched to show he meant no harm. "Mom, my name is Jed. I didn't know. If I had known..." His voice failed him, and he had to pause to regain control. "The baby is very sick," Maria said weakly, noticing the genuine kindness in Jed's eyes. "He needs a doctor, but we can't leave. Mr. Thorne said if we try to escape, he'll do the same to other families." The oldest child, the 12-year-old girl, looked at Jed with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "Are you really going to help us?" she asked in a voice that sounded much older than her years. "Or are you just going to pretend like the others?" Jed knelt in front of the girl, his tears now falling freely. "I promise you, on everything that is sacred, I will find a way to get you out of here. I don't know how yet, but I won't rest until you are free and safe." Sam watched Jed's reaction with relief. Finally, he had someone to share the weight of this terrible secret. But at the same time, a new worry grew in his heart. Two simple men against the most powerful man in the region. How could they succeed where so many others had failed? "Jed," Sam said, his voice filled with urgency, "we need to think carefully about our next steps. If Richard finds out we know about this, not only will these people be in greater danger, But our lives will be at risk too. Jed nodded, but his determination was unshakable. Storm had shown him something that had changed his perspective on everything. He could no longer live his simple life knowing that just a few miles away, an entire family was suffering in silence. In the hours following the discovery, Jed and Sam remained in the abandoned barn, whispering with Maria and learning more about the extent of the horror Richard had created. Baby Carlos was clearly getting worse, his breathing becoming more labored with each passing hour. "He needs medical attention immediately," Jed said, watching the small child with growing desperation. "Do you know any doctor or nurse in the area who could help us without asking questions?" Sam thought for a moment. "There's Dr. Miller, who retired a few years ago. He lives alone in town and was always known for his discretion. Maybe he would agree to come here at night without anyone knowing." Maria gripped Jed's hand with desperate force. "Please, save my baby. I can endure any suffering, but he is innocent. He doesn't deserve to die for crimes he never committed." The mother's plea touched Jed's heart deeply. He thought of his own loneliness, of how Storm had been his only companion for so many years. Now, the horse had given him a purpose greater than he had ever imagined possible, the chance to save innocent lives. "Maria," Jed said firmly, "tonight we will bring medical help for Carlos, and we will start planning how to get all of you out of here." Storm, who had remained quiet during the conversation, suddenly lifted his head, his ears pricking up. The horse had detected something the humans had not yet perceived, the distant sound of an approaching engine. His sharp instincts warned him of imminent danger. "Someone's coming," Sam whispered, recognizing Storm's warning signs. "We need to get out of here now." Jed gently kissed Carlos's forehead, a silent promise that he would return. "Hold on, just a little longer. We won't abandon you." The three quickly left the barn, with Storm guiding them along a path that avoided the main areas of the property. The horse demonstrated an impressive strategic intelligence, choosing routes that kept them hidden from the view of anyone who might be approaching. Back at the main stable, they feigned normalcy as Richard arrived in his truck, accompanied by two men Jed didn't recognize. The strangers had an intimidating appearance and cold eyes that made the farmer feel uneasy. "Stone," Richard said with feigned surprise, "what a pleasure to see you here. Come to check on how your old horse is settling in." Jed forced a smile, trying to control his nerves. "Yes, Mr. Thorne. I was worried when he showed up at my house last night. I thought maybe he had escaped." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Escaped? Interesting. Sam, you didn't tell me anything about the horse leaving the property." Sam swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his boss's suspicious gaze. I didn't know, sir. I checked the stable last night, and Storm was there." "Well," Richard said slowly, I suggest you reinforce the security. I can't have valuable animals wandering the region. It might give people the wrong ideas about the security of my property." The veiled threat in Richard's words was clear to everyone. Jed felt a chill run down his spine, but the comforting presence of Storm by his side gave him the strength to maintain the facade. One of the men accompanying Richard whispered something in his ear. The tycoon nodded and then addressed Jed again. "Well, Stone, I hope this is your last unannounced visit. As you can see, I have important business to attend to." Jed nodded respectfully, but inside, his determination only grew stronger. Storm had shown him that some values were more important than fear, and that even the simplest men could make a difference when they fought for justice. That night would be decisive. Jed had returned to his homestead, but he could think of nothing but Carlos's pale face and the desperation in Maria's eyes. At 10 o'clock, as they had arranged, he headed to town in search of Dr. Miller, praying the retired doctor would agree to help them. Dr. Miller's house was on a quiet street away from the town centre. It was a simple but well-kept building with a small garden where the old doctor grew medicinal herbs. When Jed knocked on the door, his hands were trembling with nervousness. "Doctor Miller," Jed called softly when the door opened, revealing a man with grey hair and kind eyes. "My name is Jedediah Stone. I desperately need your help." The doctor observed the farmer for a moment, noticing the sincerity and desperation in his eyes. "Come in, son. What's going on?" Over the next 20 minutes, Jed told the whole story, from the sale of Storm to the terrible discovery in the abandoned barn. Dr. Miller listened in silence, his expression growing more grave with every word. "I always suspected Richard Thorne was hiding dark secrets," the doctor said finally, "but I never imagined something so monstrous. Of course, I'll help. A sick child can't wait for bureaucracy or fear." Meanwhile, on Richard's property, Sam kept watch. He had observed the movements in the mansion and knew his boss was entertained with his visitors, drinking and discussing business. It was the perfect moment to bring medical help to Maria and her children. Storm was restless again, as if he knew something important was about to happen. The horse paced nervously in his stall, his ears always alert for any suspicious sound that might indicate danger. Around midnight, Jed returned with Dr. Miller. The doctor had brought a discreet bag with medicine and basic equipment. His expression was determined, but Jed could see the tension in his eyes. They all knew they were risking a great deal. "If we're discovered," the doctor whispered as they headed to the abandoned barn, "Richard won't hesitate to use his influence to destroy us. But I can't let a child die out of cowardice." When they reached the barn, Maria nearly fainted with relief at the sight of the doctor. Carlos was even weaker, his breathing almost imperceptible. Dr. Miller immediately knelt beside the baby and began his examination. "Advanced pneumonia," he murmured after a few minutes. "The child is severely dehydrated and malnourished. I need to administer antibiotics immediately, but he'll need constant care for the next few days." As the doctor worked, administering medicine and teaching Maria how to better care for the baby, the other children watched with a mixture of hope and fear. It was the first time in months they had seen an adult treat them with genuine compassion. "Doctor," the oldest girl whispered, "my little sister is sick too. She has sores that won't heal." The doctor examined all the children, his indignation growing with each new piece of evidence of neglect and abuse. These children need regular medical care, proper nutrition, and most of all, they need to get out of this place. Jed watched it all with a heavy heart. Storm had remained near the entrance of the barn, like a vigilant guardian. The horse seemed to understand that his mission was evolving. It wasn't enough to just reveal the truth. They had to act to change it. "Doctor," Jed said when the physician finished attending to the children, "we have to find a way to get this family out of here. I can't sleep anymore knowing they're suffering." Dr. Miller nodded gravely. "I agree, but we need a careful plan. Richard Thorne has resources and connections we don't. One false move could make the situation even worse for everyone." The days following Dr. Miller's visit were marked by a frantic but carefully disguised activity. Jed, Sam, and the doctor met secretly to plan how they could not only help Maria's family, but also expose Richard's crimes in a way that would ensure true justice. Carlos had responded well to the initial treatment, but still needed constant care. Dr. Miller made regular nightly visits, always running the risk of being discovered. During one of these visits, he made a suggestion that would change everything. "Do you know Nurse Davies from town?" the doctor asked Jed. "She worked with me for years before I retired. She's a woman of principle and courage. Maybe she can help us care for the children and also document evidence of what's happening here." Jed nodded enthusiastically. Any additional help would be welcome, especially from someone with medical knowledge and experience. Do you think she'd agree to get involved in something so dangerous? Rosa lost her own young son years ago because she couldn't get access to proper medical care, the doctor explained. Since then, she has dedicated her life to protecting vulnerable children. If she knows what's happening here, I'm sure she'll want to help. Meanwhile, Storm continued to be central to the entire operation. The horse had developed his own routine. During the day, he behaved normally in the main stable, but his nights were dedicated to watching over the area around the abandoned barn. It was as if he had personally taken on the responsibility of protecting Maria's family. Sam watched Storm's extraordinary intelligence with fascination. The horse seemed to instinctively understand when it was safe to approach the abandoned barn and when it was better to stay away. His instincts were more reliable than any security system. On Wednesday night, Rosa Davies arrived, brought by Dr. Miller. She was a middle-aged woman with grey hair tied in a simple bun and eyes that radiated determination. When she saw the conditions the family was living in, her tears of indignation mixed with a controlled fury. "How can anyone do this to innocent children?" she whispered, carefully examining each of the children. "These little ones have signs of deep trauma, in addition to the obvious physical problems." Rosa not only brought more medical supplies, but also something equally valuable, her experience in documenting cases of abuse and neglect. "We need to photograph the conditions here, record the children's injuries and symptoms, and collect evidence that can be used against Richard," she explained. Maria, who had initially been suspicious of another person discovering their hiding place, soon felt comfortable with Rosa. The nurse had a motherly way of treating the children that instantly calmed them. "Rosa," Maria said, as the nurse treated an infected wound on her youngest daughter's leg, "are there other families suffering like us?" The question made all the adults look at each other. It was something they had begun to suspect but hadn't dared to investigate yet. If Richard was holding one family captive, it was possible there were other victims in different locations on the property. "Maria," Jed said gently, "do you know anything about other people who have gone missing in the area? Families who came looking for work and were never seen again?" Maria's expression grew even darker. "At night, when they make us work, sometimes we hear voices coming from other parts of the property, muffled screams, crying. We always thought it was just our nightmares, but..." The silence that followed was heavy. The possibility of more victims made the situation even more urgent and complex. How could they save everyone without alerting Richard to their activities? Storm, as if sensing the growing tension among the humans, approached Jed and gently rested his head on his shoulder. It was a comforting gesture that reminded the farmer that they were not alone in this fight. The moment they all feared finally arrived. It was a rainy Friday, when Sam noticed unusual movement at Richard's mansion. Unknown men were arriving in luxury cars, and there was a hustle and bustle that suggested something important was about to happen. Through conversations he managed to overhear, Sam discovered that Richard was planning to transfer some assets over the weekend. The phrase made Sam's blood run cold. In Richard's cruel vocabulary, assets meant people. Maria's family and possibly other victims were about to be moved to an even more dangerous location, or, worse, they might simply disappear forever. Storm also sensed the tension in the air. The horse was more restless than ever, pacing nervously in his stall and neighing softly whenever he looked towards the mansion. It was as if his keen instincts picked up on the approaching danger. Sam rushed to find Jed, who was at his homestead trying to find a way to contact trustworthy authorities. When he received the news, the farmer felt the world spin. They didn't have enough time to follow all the legal protocols. They had to act immediately. "Jed," Sam said, his voice trembling with urgency. "I heard Richard talking about moving the people early tomorrow morning. If we don't do something tonight, it might be our last chance to save that family." Jed clenched his fists, feeling a determination he had never experienced before. "Then it's tonight. Rosa and Dr. Miller need to know. We'll need everyone to get Maria and the children off the property without being detected." That afternoon, as the rain fell heavily over the region, the four conspirators gathered at Jed's house to finalize a desperate plan. They knew they were risking everything: their lives, their freedom, their futures. But they could no longer live knowing that innocent children were suffering while they stood by passively. "Storm will be our advantage," Jed said, looking at his faithful companion. "He knows every corner of that property better than any of us, and his intelligence has been our guide from the beginning." The plan was simple, but risky. Sam would use his position as an employee to distract the guards during the night shift change. Rosa and Dr. Miller would be ready with a vehicle nearby to receive the family. Jed and Storm would enter the property from the back and guide Maria and the children to a safe meeting point. When night fell, the strong winds and continuous rain provided the natural cover they needed. Storm seemed to understand the importance of that night. His steps were silent, his movements calculated, as if he were a soldier on a rescue mission. Jed had never felt his heart beat so fast. As he followed Storm through the dark, wet fields, he thought about how his life had completely changed since he sold his beloved friend. Now, that same friend was leading the most important mission of their lives. When they reached the abandoned barn, they found Maria awake, holding Carlos to her chest. She had noticed the strange activity during the day and knew something was about to happen. Her eyes reflected both relief and terror when she saw Jed and Storm. "It's time," Jed whispered. "We're getting you out of here tonight, for good." The children clung to each other, hardly believing the moment of liberation had finally come. But they all knew they still had to travel the most dangerous path, getting off the property without being detected by Richard's men, who were patrolling the grounds with heightened vigilance on this specific night. The escape unfolded like a silent ballet under the pre-dawn rain. Storm led the group through paths only he knew, his hooves making almost no sound on the wet earth. Jed carried little Carlos in his arms, while Maria guided her other children in a silent line behind him. Sam had played his part perfectly, creating a diversion on the opposite side of the property by reporting a fictitious problem with Richard's racehorses. The guards focused on that area, leaving the escape route temporarily unprotected. When they reached the meeting point, Rosa and Dr. Miller were waiting with a warm vehicle and medical supplies. The nurse immediately took Carlos in her arms, checking his vital signs while the doctor helped the other children into the car. "We did it," Jed whispered, hardly believing the plan had worked. "We really did it." But his celebration was premature. Powerful headlights suddenly illuminated the group, and Richard's cold voice echoed through the darkness. "I thought there might be rats on my property." Richard had discovered the escape and had followed them with two of his henchmen. His expression was a mask of controlled fury that made everyone tremble. "Do you really think you can steal from me and get away with it?" Jed placed himself between Richard and the family, his arms outstretched in a protective gesture. "These people are not your property. They are human beings you held in inhuman conditions." "Property?" Richard laughed bitterly. "They owe me a lot of money. They're just paying their debts the only way they know how." It was at that moment that Storm showed a courage that surprised everyone. The horse positioned himself beside Jed, creating a protective barrier between Richard and the terrified family. His eyes shone with a steely determination that made even the henchmen take an instinctive step back. "Doctor," Rosa Davies whispered urgently, "I managed to film everything over the past few days. We have enough evidence to destroy this monster." Richard Thorne overheard, and his expression grew even more dangerous. "Evidence! You think anyone will believe your word against mine? I run this county." But what Richard didn't know was that Dr. Miller had been smarter than he could have imagined. Over the past few weeks, the doctor had been discreetly in contact with an investigative journalist from Chicago, feeding him information and evidence about the suspicious activities on Richard's property. At that exact moment, as if in answer to their prayers, police sirens began to echo in the distance, rapidly approaching. The journalist had handed the evidence over to the state police, who had finally decided to investigate the allegations against Richard Thorne. Richard's face went pale as he realized he was cornered. His henchmen, seeing the police approach, began to back away, not wanting to be caught in the middle of a collapsing criminal operation. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Richard yelled, but his voice no longer carried the same authority. "I have connections, influence." "You had influence," Dr. Miller corrected calmly. "The state police are investigating not just this case, but all of your operations. Other families have been found in similar conditions on properties linked to your name." When the state police cruisers finally arrived, followed by ambulances and state officials' cars, the scene they found confirmed all the reports. Maria and her children were immediately taken for proper medical care, while Richard was arrested on the spot. Storm watched it all with a serenity that seemed almost human. The horse had fulfilled his extraordinary mission, not only exposing the truth, but bringing together people brave enough to fight for justice. Jed stroked his friend's mane, knowing that nothing would ever be the same. 6 months had passed since that rainy night that changed everyone's lives. The morning sun shone on a completely transformed landscape. Where once there was only fear and oppression, now hope and community blossomed. Richard Thorne's former estate had been seized by the state and turned into a shelter and community center for vulnerable families. The place that was once a symbol of corrupt power now represented the strength of human solidarity. Maria worked there as a coordinator, using her experience of survival to help other victims recover. Carlos, now a healthy and laughing baby, played in the garden under the loving care of his mother and sisters. Proper medical treatment and a safe environment had worked miracles for the whole family. The other children attended the local school and were slowly learning to trust the world again. Jed watched the scene with a smile on his face, leaning against the fence that now separated his property from the community center. His small homestead had become a gathering place for local residents who had discovered that true wealth lay in unity and mutual support. Storm grazed freely in the green fields, his white coat shining under the sun like a symbol of purity and redemption. The horse had become a local legend. The story of the animal who exposed corruption and saved lives was told with admiration throughout the region. Children came from miles around just to see him and hear his extraordinary story. "Jed," Maria approached, holding Carlos. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you did for us." The farmer shook his head humbly. "It was Storm who did it all. I just followed where he led me." As if he knew they were talking about him, Storm approached the group, allowing Carlos to stretch out his little hands to touch his velvety muzzle. The baby let out a joyful laugh, a sound that echoed across the property like heavenly music. Sam, who now managed the community center's stables, joined the group. He had found his true calling, not just in caring for animals, but in running a therapeutic riding program for at-risk youth. "We got a letter today," Sam said, holding out an envelope to Jed. "It's from one of the other families that were freed. They want to come visit Storm and thank him in person." Jed smiled, remembering how the investigation had revealed a network of exploitation far larger than they had imagined. Dozens of families had been freed. and Richard was facing multiple charges that would ensure he spent many years behind bars. Dr. Miller and Rosa Davies had also found new purpose. Together, they started a mobile clinic that visited isolated rural communities, ensuring that no child went without proper medical care. Their partnership had saved hundreds of lives since then. In the afternoon, as the sun began to set, Jed mounted Storm and they rode together through the fields they now knew so well. It was no longer a land of dark secrets, but a place where hope had conquered despair. "Thank you, my friend," Jed whispered, stroking Storm's mane. "You taught me that even the simplest people can make a difference when they have the courage to do what's right." The horse neighed softly in response, his intelligent eyes reflecting the wisdom of one who understands that true nobility comes not from bloodlines or wealth, but from compassion and the courage to protect the defenseless. As the sun set over Hope's End, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the community gathered for another day of peace. The place that was once a scene of horror now echoed with the laughter of children and the hopeful conversations of adults who had rediscovered their faith in humanity. Storm had proven that even in the darkest of places, there is always a light waiting to be found by those brave enough to seek it.